Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Guerin, and I will be the host of today's webcast, where we will be discussing the Atlantic hurricane season, some potential trends for hurricanes in the Atlantic, as well as taking a look at some of the economic impacts hurricanes can have on the average person. Joining me today to help make sense of all of this is Matt Lanza. He's the lead meteorologist at Cheniere Energy. I believe I got that right this time.
Nailed it.
Um, as well as the editor for both Space City Weather and the iWall, two Houston-based meteorology sites. Matt, thanks for agreeing to join us here today to help tackle this both fascinating and fairly difficult topic.
You bet. Good to be here, Michael.
All right, so we got a lot to cover. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight into the first question, which is how much of the current hurricane season forecast can be attributed to climate change, either directly or indirectly?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I don't know that anybody has the answer. Hurricane activity has been kind of interesting, and I've read a lot of papers in the last couple of years about, how climate change may or may not influence tropical development, hurricanes, things like that. Particularly as it relates to the Gulf, just because I'm down here in Houston, and that's kind of what I care about. The general consensus that I've seemed to come to, just based on all these papers or what the authors have seemed to come to, is that it's impacting it in the sense that we're expecting stronger storms. So a little bit more in the way of higher end storms. And I think you've kind of maybe seen some of that in the last, 6 or 7, 8 years or whatever, where we've had all these storms that just rapidly intensify right up to the moment of landfall in the Gulf Coast, which kind of breaks what we thought was, the paradigm for the Gulf, which was storms peak somewhere out in the middle of the Gulf, and then as they approach land, they tend to weaken. But as we've seen more research come out in recent years, it seems to be that that's not the case. And I think observationally, we've kind of backed that up a little bit. The Gulf is warmed dramatically. It's one of the at least relative to the rest of the Atlantic. I think the rest of the Atlantic is kind of catching up now a little bit to where the Gulf's been for a while, in terms of how warm it is. So, you kind of view that as a microcosm for sort of the rest of the tropics. But sort of on a broader scale, we've got extremely warm water. The reasons for the extreme warm water may be a little bit complicated. It's certainly climate change is a part of that. There's been hypotheses about changes in shipping regulations that have led to less sulfur dioxide pollution, which has actually cleared the air, more sun, warmer water, over really the entire Atlantic, not just the tropical Atlantic. That may play a role as well. So, like everything's very complex and nuanced. So it's never one particular reason, but climate change is certainly playing some role in that, and exactly what it means for future tracks of storms, not just intensity. You also have to think about how that's going to impact storm tracks and trajectories and movements and things like that. I think that there's still a lot to be learned in terms of that. One interesting trend that has shown up in a lot of papers recently has been this linkage toward slowing storms at landfall. It's like as they approach the coast, they start to weaken or start to slow down. Their forward speed weakens, and they produce more rain. And that's obviously a concern. We saw that kind of with Harvey. We've seen that with Florence and some other storms as well. So all sorts of things to look at with this, and a lot of areas of research to tackle.
Yeah, and I kind of a little spoiler for a future question we'll get to in a minute here, but with the hurricane strengthening up to landfall, I remember I think the earliest hurricane I can remember is probably Hurricane Katrina, all those years ago. I think was it 2003 or five? My memory is
Five,
terrible.
yeah.
Right, yeah, so we're heading on almost 20 years ago. And I remember that was Cat 5 in the Gulf, and then as it approached Louisiana, it dropped down to Cat 3. Not that it really made all that much of a difference in the devastation, but it still weakened, and you have to kind of wonder if that happened today, would it weaken, and what would happen? I'm hoping. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on the systems they have in place in Louisiana, but I'm hoping they've upgraded those since then and are a little bit more prepared. But not going to get too much into that. We're not. That's not the purpose of this webcast. But yeah. So why don't we hit that one? It wasn't going to be the next question, but let's make it the next question anyway. Is there a trend for storms to strengthen or maintain their strength right up to landfall? We've seen a couple of these. Um, last year with the storm that just came in just south of Tampa.
Mhm.
That one kind of people were expecting, oh, it might weaken to Cat 3, but it maintained Cat 4 almost, I think, just a hair under Cat 5 at landfall, which pretty unprecedented. So is that a trend that you see going forward too?
Yeah, I think that it's an important thing to think about because number one, it impacts obviously the forecast quality of if you're expecting a storm to weaken and it doesn't, that has a big impact. In terms of actual effects seen, on the ground, in some of these places. I think, Ian in 2022, that's the one that went south of Tampa. It was interesting. Last year, 23, we had a Dahlia, which actually sort of went by the old playbook of it strengthened, it rapidly intensified, and then as it moved inland, or as it approached the coast, it weakened. And there was still some pretty serious damage, but it wasn't quite as bad as some of the others that we've seen. But I mean, you go and you look at Ian, you look at Ida that hit, Grand Isle, Louisiana back in 22, I believe. You've got Harvey, which intensified up to landfall, Laura and Lake Charles that intensified up to landfall, even some of these other storms, Zeta that hit near New Orleans in the ridiculous 2020 season. All these storms have like done this. And the question I think that we all have is, was that just dumb luck or is that a function of something that's fundamentally changed? And I think it's of both. There's always going to be an element of luck involved in weather. But what we've seen is we've seen sort of the depth of warm water increase in the Gulf, in particular. So as these storms travel and they approach the coast, they tend to upwell cooler water. Well, if that water is not as cool as it used to be, then it's just less warm. They're still being able to feed off it, right? So that kind of has an impact, I think. I've seen some work that's been done that's talked about how wind shear can impact storms more favorably, even as they approach the coast, and can actually enhance them a little bit as they come inland. And I don't know if that's a feature of climate change or just something that we've discovered more about in recent years. And there's also sort of the way the depth of the Gulf changes as you approach the coast. Certain elements of that maybe this were poorly understood years ago that we better understand now. So there's all these different things in play, and I think all of them tend to point to a little bit of everything being involved here. And I'm concerned that we are heading in the direction where that is kind of the new normal to some extent. Not every storm's going to do it. There's always going to be exceptions, like Adalia last year. But I think that some of these bigger cases and the ones that'll have the biggest impact to begin with are going to be even a little bit worse. And that's certainly a concern for anyone living on the Gulf. I think it requires us to have more prep time. It requires us to, have stronger building codes and all these different things that I don't know that we're prepared for. So it creates
Right.
a little bit of uncertainty here.
Right, yeah, and with the Atlantic now starting to catch up, as you mentioned, now you have to consider other areas as well, because North Carolina, South Carolina. I don't think a Cat 4 or 5 is. I don't know if they've ever had one over there. I don't think they have, but now with the water temperatures increasing, maybe they start having to worry about that. We had Sandy in New Jersey 10, I guess maybe even 15 years ago now. I can't believe the years just go by these
I
days.
know.
um, but that it was a once in a generational event. Even then, as I think it's the only storm. I remember I did a project in college. It was the only storm to curve like that. All of the other ones were essentially like this up the coast. And
Yeah.
but who's to say you can't have something similar happen now that there's warmer waters, getting warmer deeper into the year, where you can have more of these setups where you can have a hurricane get hooked in similar to Sandy. And then who's to say that can't happen further up the coast in places like Massachusetts or I think there was a crazy strong storm that hit like Nova Scotia or something in that area.
Mhm.
So, and they're getting it's a whole now eastern seaboard issue now, and not just the Gulf, and it's only going to get worse unless something dramatic changes in the next few years, which I don't believe anyone thinks is going to happen. And you
Right.
know, it's a disturbing trend to say the least, and certainly makes for some interesting hurricanes. That's as meteorologists we have to admit, we like to see strong hurricanes. We just don't want to see what comes after.
Yes. Yes.
um, so
But
yeah, go ahead.
I was
Sorry.
just, yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. It's like the East Coast, we've seen certainly some hits there in recent years, but there's a long history that going back to the 50s and 30s when you've got all these, these big storms that have come up the coast and, ravaged Carolinas, ravaged New England, and we haven't seen one of those in a pretty long time, like a legitimate like big wind and really other than Sandy, which was really a surge event more so than even the wind. But um, y- people just need to kind of be prepared because, yeah, like you said, if those waters stay warmer longer, you're just upping the ante a little bit in terms of what can happen in some of those places that are just not used to it and haven't seen it in ages.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you mentioned the building code. I'm fairly confident the building code in a lot of those states, and is that you see some of these houses on the beach. It's like four sticks holding up the whole house, and it's like how does this survive anything?
It's
It's not
amazing.
yeah. So we're gonna take a step back and go hit more towards the climate change aspect again. Get back to that second question. So, to your knowledge, have the effects of climate change on the hurricane season, have they been getting worse over the years, or have they kind of stayed relatively consistent?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, like, you look at a statistic or a metric like name storms, and it's really hard to do a lot with that because our observational techniques have gotten so much better. So we can name more, smaller storms now that we used to in the past. So there's certainly a lot of almost what you would call like name inflation in terms of that. But like if you look at the big ones, the ones that we were pretty confident that we didn't miss 50, 60, 70 years ago, I think that the trends are fairly stable in terms of like quantity. I mean, you can go back to a place being in Texas. You look back at Texas hurricane history and going back into the 1800s, it's just littered with some years even having like three or four hurricanes hit the coast in Texas in some years. So, I mean, there's some crazy stuff that's happened weather-wise. So, factoring that into it is important too. But I think what you're doing now is you are raising the ceiling of what some of these storms can do more so than raising necessarily the quantity of storms or anything like that that can cause damage. But you get some of these Idas and Ians and Lauras and Harveys and on and on that enter this warm water and they have a higher ceiling that maybe they did 40, 50, 60 years ago. And I think that's really where um, you see more of that potential. And I think you see it in the Atlantic side too, with some of the warmer water there, where you get some storms that just explode into, Cat fives out in the middle of the ocean that, they're not going to harm anything really, but observing it is certainly impressive. And I think we see a little bit more frequency of that possibly happening going forward. Again, storms out in the middle of the ocean, you have to be careful just because we didn't have satellite observation covering everything 60, 70 years ago. So, there's a lot that we know now that we didn't. But at the same time, there's a lot that we see, and it's the bigger problem I think right now is really just we have too many people and too much stuff in the way, and that's really inflating the cost of these storms more than anything. And we're slowly learning our lesson, but maybe not fast enough. Um, to save some things. Even just living in a place like Houston, seeing all the growth that we have here, seeing all the growth that, I've looked at how some buildings that are under development in Miami. I mean, there are just tons of high rises going up in Miami, the just condos and offices and everything. It's just rampant growth. And yeah, those buildings are probably going to be okay during storms because they're going to be constructed to handle it. The building codes in Florida generally are top of the line. But you've still got more things in the way. And, when the 1935, I think it was, Labor Day storm repeats itself one day, it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
And inevitably that's going to happen in Florida. So all these places that are just increasing and increasing and increasing their vulnerability, that's, again, every problem is more complicated than just one thing, and climate change is one of them. It's just one element that is layered on top of a lot of them that are adding up for our coastal locations.
Right. Yeah. And, you also have to, going back to what we said earlier, uh with the waters warming, you have now even more areas that can experience a category 4 or 5, something that they've probably never seen before. And you've got all these people that want all this beachfront property, and they don't, they only are thinking it's like, oh, I can see the beach from my house. But what good is that going to do you
Right.
when that beach is 20 feet underwater?
Yeah.
They don't, I think it's always kind of funny and where people don't really think about the consequences of what they're doing until it's upon them. And
Yes.
I think that that adds into, one of our the questions I have at the end here, but we'll save that for later. But something that has interested both Dave and myself is, we see that the National Hurricane Center, they're very good at forecasting, but how do the models handle these types of storms, and how do they handle that sudden intensification and the maintaining their strength up to landfall? Have the models been doing a good job handling all that, or has it kind of been like a dartboard kind of deal?
Yeah, yeah. The unsatisfying answer is it depends, right? It depends on every
Right.
situation, every storm, and it's all unique. And I think that we've made a lot of progress in terms of track forecasting. Track forecasting has become, for the most part, really good. There's still some variation, there's still some issues. You can look back at one of the examples is Hurricane Ian in 22, where the modeling had it sort of lined up to go toward Tampa, and it just shifted a little to the east. But because of the geography of the Florida coast, that makes a huge difference, and it comes in near Fort Myers instead of Tampa, and keeps Tampa on the weaker side of the storm, and the impacts in Tampa aren't that bad. Where the impacts in Fort Myers are just utterly devastating. So in those really marginal situations where you've got a large population that is vulnerable to being struck, these small differences in track make a big difference in outcome. But overall, in general, the track forecasting has become, pretty good. That doesn't mean it's perfect. There's always exceptions to the rule. We've seen that with some storms in the Atlantic. Every now and then, you'll just get a storm where, for whatever reason, because of the way things are set up, you just don't know where it's going to go. You'll have, like, all of a sudden you'll have this really, really tight spread in ensemble guidance where you're running all the different models multiple times. And then all of a sudden, like at day 3, it goes like this. And you're just like, oh, wow. So there's no confidence beyond day 2 as to where this thing's going to go. And you just have to wait for something, whatever it is, be it a, high pressure system, whatever steering it, something to get where it's going to go for you to understand, okay, well, this subset of outcomes is the most likely. And so we still see that from time to time. I think most of the time it doesn't have huge consequences on the short term. So, like, it still has consequences maybe downstream 5, 6, 7, 8 days from that point. But that's still enough time to really, in general, prepare. So fortunately, we haven't really had to deal with a lot of excruciating situations that are real nail biting. Um, but the intensity forecasting still remains a challenge. And I think you go back to last year, 23, Hurricane Otis in the Pacific that just ravaged Acapulco. Going back over the model data, sure, some of them had this storm intensifying into a, Cat 4, but I don't think any model guidance was able to capture what got this going to, Cat 5 plus intensity, going, above what's normal for a Cat 5 even. Um, and then, of course, that consequence of it is impacted directly a major population center. You try not to read into that too much when it comes to, like, being objective about modeling. but you have to, because that's, a storm doing that it's unacceptable from an end user standpoint. Having that many people impacted by a forecast that poor, that wasn't even like super bad, but it was bad enough that it had a huge outcome and huge difference in outcome. So, we still have a lot of work to do in terms of seeing the models get better at intensification. I think you've seen some of these models like the H-Wharf, the HAFs now, this the new hurricane model. They do a little bit of a better job in capturing some of these, probabilities of intensifying. And I think that's the important thing is as we forecast, we need to do a better job of like going into the, not that this storm is going to become a category 5, but most likely this is going to be a cat 3, but there's a 20% chance it goes to 4, 10% chance it goes to a 5. Getting more into this probabilistic type jargon, which I know some people hate, but that's how you have to handle this sort of stuff, because there's no cut and dry solution that's going to work in terms of, why one storm feasts on everything just right and becomes a category 5 versus another that has those same ingredients seemingly in place and doesn't. There's too much internal variability within the hurricane to really, be able to predict that. And we're just not to the level of modeling yet that we can do any of that. So I think the best we can do now is probabilistic prediction, and try and do more of that, and just try and, level with people that that's how it has to be, and that that's what we think and know. It's great to see the models are improving, but I think that the rapid pace of improvement is starting to slow a little bit, which, I think was kind of inevitable at some point. And, we got so much better at doing certain things, and now we're not as great at doing other things, and we have to see where we can improve there. And ensemble forecasting is going to be your best friend going forward. So get used to it.
Yeah. And I don't really get how someone could be irritated by a probabilistic forecast. I mean, if you tell me, okay, there's 25% chance cat 5, 70% chance cat 4, 5% chance cat 3, I'm like, okay, most likely cat 4, good decent enough chance cat 5. Impact wise, for the average person, that doesn't really matter.
Yep.
At the end of the
Right.
day, it's the same thing. So you got to get out anyway if there's a cat 4 coming for you. And at least though it sounds like we've got within a decent range in terms the models are handling it within a decent range. It's not like they're flip-flopping between a landfall in Miami to a landfall in New Orleans. So we got, and then the intensity. I have seen. I don't trust a lot of the hurricane models, but when it comes to intensity anyway. But I have seen a couple of them. They just go off the rails, and I think that I have a saved image of one getting down to sub 800 pressure somewhere. I think it was a Pacific hurricane,
Right.
uh, but um, so but yeah, I think you're right. If I think the key takeaway from all of this is that the models, just like anything else with any forecast, they're a tool that we should use, but they shouldn't be the only tool.
Yes.
And having a human behind that forecast, at least for now, as long as we don't get replaced by AI, um, that's going to be the key to getting that 50-mile difference, which, as you said, made the difference between Tampa being destroyed or Fort Myers being destroyed, which, you know, lesser of two evils in that case, because, Tampa's a pretty big city. But who's to say next time it won't be Tampa?
Yeah,
Um,
and one thing I'll just add too is, like, I
yeah,
think this is from a communicative standpoint, it's really important because you get people that throw some of these model images out in the middle of storms, and they are the craziest solutions, right? And you have to just be careful because that's what they're going to pick, and you have to know when to use those models. Like, we know that, like, the H Wharf is a really good hurricane model, but it does have a tendency to go, like you said, off the rails sometimes with some of these predictions. But there are instances where that's valuable, and there's instances where that that's garbage as a meteorologist.
right, yeah.
And it's kind of up to us to decipher all that, and that's why when Joe Q Public sees anything, they're going to freak out. And it's just important to be very clear about what you're showing people.
Yeah, I it's not really related to our webcast, so I won't say too much about it, but something that happened, I think it was last year. I've got some friends down in Jacksonville, and there was a hurricane. I think it was supposed to hit as like a Cat 1 or Cat 2 on the west coast of Florida.
Mhm.
and they were asking me, so one of them said, "Oh, it's supposed to come and hit Jacksonville as like a Cat 1 or 2." I was like, "Oh, when did that happen?" I'm looking at it right now. It says tropical storm at best. And they were like, "No, I saw a TikTok about it." And I was like, "Oh boy, here we go." So I asked them to send it to me, and it was I think it was a 6Z run of the GFS that had it exiting Florida on the East Coast, doing a loop around, and then coming back and hitting Jacksonville as a better formed storm than when it started. And then there was a second friend, not I think it was like a week later. He says, "Oh, there's like supposed to be like a Cat 5 coming to I think he lives near Boston. It's like there's a Cat 5 coming up towards my way." And I was like, "What are you talking about? The forecast for this storm is like to Nova Scotia. That's like 800 miles or something." And he's like, and he sends me TikTok again. Um, I had to double take what it was. It was just a wave heights that somebody had posted saying,
Right.
"Oh, here, look, it's a Cat 5." And I was like, "No, this is just wave heights. This doesn't prove anything."
Oh
And
God.
it's that the yeah, it not to get too far off topic, but it's a personal pet peeve of mine too, and I'm sure you've had way worse than that being active on
Yes.
Twitter.
We live in weird times. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. So to keep it moving though, so there's been a large increase in hurricane insurance costs across essentially the entire southern United States, and I'm sure it'll start creeping up the coast as they start to realize what we've already talked about. Um, so you've already kind of answered this a little bit, but I'll ask again. What do you attribute this mostly to?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, and there's been some articles of now, which I'm happy about, that have started to come out explaining this, because it does turn out that it's a lot of the country now that's starting to deal with this, and I think what you're seeing are the ramifications of so many years of disaster payouts that have had to be done by these insurance companies, that they have no choice but to raise rates, to get people to pay kind of more what the risk is, more equivalent to the risk. Because I think in some cases, like, a lot of times, you're not paying necessarily what for insurance, at least, what the actual risk for a location is. But the insurance problem is like anything else. It's complicated. It's not just disasters. It's also related to labor costs. It's also related to supply chain issues, cost of uh, inflationary costs that are being incurred by them when they have to rebuild everything. Materials cost more, and you're getting more disasters. So you saw the dominoes start to fall a little bit last year with some insurers pulling out of like California and Florida. And I think we're going to continue to see that more and more. We saw it here in Texas. Like, people's premiums are starting to go up 20 to 40% this year. They were
Wow,
ours went up like 25% this year, which was, I kind of expected, just sort of being plugged into this. But if you're not a meteorologist, you're not dealing with this, you are shocked by
right,
what you're paying. And in some cases, like, the people that are purchasing these houses for $300,000 are now paying insurance costs that are just outrageously high for what their property's worth. And it's, they're not particularly well off financially in some cases, and now this really stings. So there is a problem brewing, and it's going to get worse as we get more and more disasters that continue. And I think it's like I said, for so long we've sort of deferred this cost of actual risk that we've been building into, and now it's almost, I tell people, like, this is almost like the market telling us that this is what climate change means. And you can believe climate change or not, it doesn't really matter. The market's starting to see it in their bottom line, and they're believing it, and they're going to raise the rates to be able to satisfy what they can, to stay solvent. And like I said, it's more than that, but that's certainly an element of it. And it's I think this topic's not going anywhere anytime soon,
right.
and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I agree. And I think how many years do you think it'll be before we start seeing stuff for insurance increases for stuff like severe weather?
Yeah.
The occasional severe cold outbreak, though they haven't been as common. The heat waves, I'm sure, I think those have been getting worse and worse as time goes on as well. Uh, Heck, the nor'easters along beaches, always with the erosion, and who knows, even you could get a climate change super fueled snowstorm that drops 60 inches of snow, which would, in places that don't normally get 60 inches of snow, or, lake effect insurance, because, that's been when it happens anyway.
Hmm.
It seems that I remember, not to get too again off topic, but I remember, even 15 years ago, lake effect was kind of this supposed to be, a gradual snow, so that's how you get 120 inches of snow over the course of a season or whatever. I don't remember exactly how much Buffalo's supposed to get, um, but now it seems that it's like, okay, we're going to get 90 inches of snow like in the first 2 weeks when it gets cold, and then essentially nothing, and then another 30 inches somewhere else, probably in like 12 hours.
You're
and
right.
and it's how long before that starts to become an insurance issue? And I'm sure there's other things like flooding, flood
Yeah.
insurance. I think that's the thing people always forget with climate change. Is the floods get worse, and then you've got other problems that go along with that, and the list goes on and on and on and on,
Yeah.
and
And
it's yeah. Go ahead.
it's, it's development patterns too. I think it's
Hmm.
Steven Strader, who's I forget if he's at Villanova or used to be at Villanova, I think, but he, has talked about this expanding bullseye effect. So you've got a population center, and as things grow and expand and sprawl out, you just got more stuff in the way. So more things are going to get hit with things. And we see that certainly here in Texas, between hailstorms in Dallas and San Antonio and the cold outbreaks, and we just had this derecho move through
Right.
Houston and cause all kinds of damage. So, insurers are seeing this and they're recognizing it, and they're going to start pricing these costs in now more to the consumer than just they used to.
Right, yeah, and I saw there was what 80 to 100 mile an hour winds in the city itself,
Yep.
which that's kind of crazy. It's not something you see every day, but it's gonna happen more often. Today
Yep.
was Houston. Tomorrow we could see, not that this is gonna happen, just want to make that abundantly clear. Um, we could see tomorrow there could be an EF5 tornado that goes right into the heart of Atlanta
Yep.
or Pittsburgh. I know Pennsylvania has been starting to get, and Indianapolis and Ohio have been starting to see more tornadoes. At least it seems anecdotally that way to me. Anyway, I don't have
Yeah.
any data to back that up, but um, you know, then and of course, same thing with the hurricanes. Tornadoes are also the numbers seem to be kind of stable from what I've seen, except maybe this year's a little bit of an exception. But
Yeah.
um, but the strength of the tornado seems to also be kind of going up. So when you might not get as many, but you get bigger and stronger, and that is arguably worse.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
I'd rather have five EF zeros, which don't really, they're still dangerous, but they don't do too much damage, rather than two or three EF threes, which can, level a house. So,
Absolutely.
gets all these problems, they're starting to come to a head, and I'm not going to comment on corporate greed, but they're companies at the end of the day. They've got to keep up their bottom
Yeah.
line, and as much as I may not like it, that's the case. That's the way
Yeah.
it works. So with that being said, do you have any kind of solutions that you think would work or maybe help alleviate some of these increased insurance costs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is I don't know. This is short of living in places that are not as dangerous. I don't know what else you could do. But now at the same time, like we see a lot of, you think about places that are less populated on the plains. Um, they're less populated probably for a reason. They get some pretty extreme weather there, so it doesn't impact as many people. Um, the Northeast gets snow and nor'easters, and people don't want to be in where places that are cold. But then you've got the West, which seems great, but they've got water supply issues and extreme heat in the Southwest, and so like no place is perfect, right? And there's no place in the
Right.
country that's perfect at all. So what I think you need to do is I think that there needs to be some kind of you can't just charge people higher insurance costs. You have to give them a reason to harden their homes or to build better or put pressure on states to increase building codes and things like that. Like Texas has comparatively weak building codes compared to a place like Florida, which has really strong building codes, but could probably even be stronger. But you've got all these places, especially in the South and the plains, that don't have as good of building codes as other places, and that would make a big difference. If you can, anchor some of these homes to withstand stronger storms, then, yeah, you can, it's not going to be fun to go through, but you can tolerate it, right? And the damage will be more cosmetic and less, significant. Still going to cost money, but maybe instead of one storm costing you $10 billion, it costs you one or two. And that's a significant improvement.
Yeah,
So, but the cost to do that is expensive. We already have a housing crisis in the country. It's hard for people to afford even to live as it is. And now you're talking about increasing building codes, which is inevitably going to make properties cost more. So what do you do? You're kind of in a really lousy situation.
right.
So, something's going to have to give at some point. And, I don't know whose job it is to come up with that answer, but I sure hope somebody's paying attention.
Yeah, me too. And I don't the only thing I can add to that is I know the mangrove forests out in Louisiana. I don't know how much it helped to weaken any approaching storms. I don't have that data on me, but I know it at least from what I remember that used to help to weaken storms as they came closer to the coast and help alleviate some of the damage. But I know because of property development, a lot of that mangrove forest isn't really there anymore. And then you have things like that where we've gotten rid of natural barriers. We're building where we really shouldn't be, honestly. And then on top of all that, there's the economic impacts where you have to consider everything else. And now, it's just kind of like almost like a perfect storm coming together
Yeah, that's what
of
it feels like.
of just problems. And like you said, something's got to give. And I'm guessing at the end of the day, the government's probably going to have to get involved in some way, shape, or form. And I'm hoping that the solution they don't pick is to just subsidize insurance costs, because that's not the answer. That's just, of all the solutions you could think of, which is the one I think they're going to end up picking when they
Yeah.
do it. But we'll revisit this video in 3 years
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when just to see. But yeah. So,
Yeah.
but on that note, what kind of advice, as someone who's gone through too many, honestly, uh, severe weather and hurricanes in your lifetime, um, what kind of advice do you have for people to kind of minimize the damage to their own property and to keep themselves as safe as possible when stuff like severe weather, et cetera, is bearing down on them?
Yeah, there's a number of things I think. In first of all, when you're living in a place with hurricanes, and really this should probably apply to everyone now that lives near the coast anywhere. We always say to prepare every year as if that's going to be the year you get hit by a storm. And I think that that's especially true. And I think for a long time, people haven't really done that.
Right,
There's certainly some that do, but there's a lot that don't. And I think you need to start taking that more seriously now, because I think we've seen enough examples in recent years where storms hit, there's damage, and you're kind of on your own for a few days. You as long as you have food and supplies, you're gonna be okay in most instances. But you really are kind of on your own. And at the same time, you if you're able to, there's going to be people that just can't afford or can't prepare.
right,
And resources need to be directed to them. So you don't want to hog the resources from those people, right? So if you can handle it yourself, you try and handle it. And so people that can do that, I think, end up better off, and they survive the storm better. And the more preparation you do ahead of time, quite frankly, you're not going to have the lead time that you think to evacuate ahead of a storm. So, if you think you're going to have like 3 days, it's going to be more like 36 hours, and you're going to be dealing with traffic, and you're going to be dealing
mm,
with, oh my God, I have to do this, 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 and this. So if you do most of that before the season, or you have a checklist of things that you have to do as soon as you pull the trigger to evacuate, then you have so much less stress. It's already going to be stressful. So why not mitigate that stress a little bit on yourself? Because that's critical for both getting out and for recovery. You don't want to start off on the
right,
wrong foot. Do what you can to your house to kind of strengthen it, harden it, make it more resilient. There's things like wildfire improvement that can be done in places in the West. You can use more fireproof materials, fireproof or less fire resilient plants and things like that. At the coast, you can strengthen your windows, just make incremental progress where you can, to
right,
harden your home up for this stuff. And um, make sure you're getting your information in times of critical stuff from reliable sources. Don't have to seek it out. Know where you're going to go. Know that these are the
Right.
people I'm going to go follow. These are the apps I have on my phone to warn me that there's a severe thunderstorm or a tornado or a hurricane or whatever. And this is what I'm going to use. And that's that. Do all your prep now. Do it on the sunny days. And find what you're comfortable with. I always tell people, like, there's no one answer. It's like, what's the best weather app or what's the best weather solution? There's not. It's what's the best weather app or solution for you. And everybody's got different needs and different ways that resonate with them. And do all that research now. And the more you can do ahead of time, just the better off you're going to be when the time comes.
Yeah, and especially with the reliable sources, always make sure. I'm not gonna say always, but pretty much almost always don't get your sources from TikTok or really Twitter or Facebook or whatever other social media sites they're coming up with these days. Go to places like the National Hurricane Center, the National Weather Service, assuming you live in America,
Yeah.
or if you live someplace not in America, I'm sure that your own country has its own hurricane service or weather service. Or if you have to go to Twitter, at least follow Matt. Like he's good. He's good. Like he's a legitimate source.
And,
You
and
know.
I can point you to someone that's more local to you too. So happy to do
Exactly.
it.
Like, and if you're genuine, and if you find a real meteorologist on Twitter, if you for some reason you could only get to Twitter, they'll point you somewhere. All of us are happy enough to send you, if we don't know ourselves, we're happy enough to send you to somebody that does, that can help you with that. And then it would
Exactly.
just to hit with the preparedness as well, it's if you're prepared, if you see there's a, you're in the cone, you're like, okay, it's time to start getting ready. Too late, essentially. It's not you can still, it's not like it's too late to get out or anything like
Right.
that. It's but in terms of preparedness, but if by the time you're in the cone you've put it off too long, it's a little too late to start really preparing now. What you should have been doing this, at the start of the season, kind of like spring cleaning, or if you have a
Right.
garden, you want to take care of the garden. It's the same thing, but it's your house,
Yes.
which arguably is more important. So,
Slightly.
yeah, some may disagree, but I think it might be. You know, but have a plan, and if you don't really know where to start, I'm sure either the government probably, either state, local, or federal has something like that. There's might even be one on the National Hurricane Center. I'm sure there must be. Almost all of them preach preparedness when it comes to hurricanes or severe weather or what have you. And it's not going to hurt you to be prepared, to have, like, a case of water that you replace once a month, just to make sure it doesn't get too old. um, or case or two of water. It depends on how much drink, how many people you got. But it doesn't hurt to have those supplies handy. It's not like they're going to go bad, and if they start to go bad, you can use them. As long as food, water, medical, first aid kits, stuff like that. Knowing which roads you need to take to get out, so that when everybody and their uncle decides, oh well, time to go, they're all on the same road. And now it's like, okay, well, I'm stuck in gridlock for 48 hours, and that's, I can't imagine someone that wants that, but
No. And
yeah,
that's a really, really good tip to have. Yeah, map your evacuation route out ahead of time. And like one thing I did when I first moved to Texas, I don't even know if I still have this now, but like I mapped out an evacuation route out of Houston if I had to go north. And I like, all right, I have to take freeways for a little bit of it, but then I get off and I'm taking not like even state routes. I'm taking farm to market, basically county roads. Whatever. It's not going to be great condition. There's going to be two lanes, but you know what? Hey, I don't have to be stuck in gridlock forever.
right, exactly. And the sooner, you know, and the sooner you can get out, the sooner you can start, uh, getting ready for whatever comes next. You have to consider, okay, how long do I have to stay here? How do I get back? Am I going to be able to get back anytime soon? These things all have to come into play. And of course, you also have to make sure that when you leave, you should probably take any important documents with you. Just I think that needs to be said as just a PSA. You don't want to go back to your house and realize, oh no, I forgot my insurance policy and now it's under 14 feet of water.
Right.
Because then you're kind of up the river without a paddle. So,
Yeah.
um, but unfortunately, that's just about all the time we've got for today. Matt, thank you for such a fascinating, honestly, and great discussion. And we hope to have you back at some point to maybe after the hurricane season is over to kind of recap and see how much of that stuff actually maybe we'll get lucky and we won't get such a bad season. But yeah, again, thank you for doing this again.
Absolutely. Happy to be here and good chat. Yeah, it's all very interesting, and we'll see where we are in a few months.
Yep. And that's all for we've got for today. So thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.